Hey guys, welcome in. This is going to be another commentary video for the Summer of Arcade series that I had released over the course of the summer. Today we are going to be talking about Metal Slug 2. All these commentary videos are going to be going in order, so we're going to be going and starting with all the Metal Slugs, and then we're going to be going from there. Out of all of them, I think the Metal Slug 2 is kind of the worst. Like, I think out of all of them, I enjoyed it the least. It does have a lot of things that it does well, but I think out of all the Metal Slug games, it probably performs the worst. And I don't mean perform like lacking in entertainment or anything like that, or lacking in sales. I mean, it literally runs like shit. So I was setting this game up to go, and I had gotten the cartridge for it. I went ahead, ripped the ROM, got it loaded into the emulator, and I noticed that this game is plagued with frame rate issues. And so I said, what the hell is going on here? So I went ahead and I had to do my research on it because these games are so old that I barely remember them. Like, I remember it when it was in arcade and stuff, but I don't really, remember what it was like. Like, I remember having fun with it, but I just don't remember the detail of it. So I had to go and look up videos, and I was like, oh man, this slowdown essentially is definitely a thing. And that's when somebody had brought up the hardware spec of a lot of SNK's cabinets at the time, and they were like, yeah, it was basically just a souped up Sega Genesis, and, so you're going to be getting some slowdown, but I think for SNK to literally go and produce these kind of visuals on a souped up Genesis was actually really, really lovely. Decided to actually go and keep the frame rate issues there because I feel like it kind of gives a more authentic experience of like actually being there. I mean, of course, you're either watching this on a cell phone or you're hanging out behind a desk or watching it on your TV at the moment. You're not going to be at the arcade, but I think that I try to strive for authenticity with these games whenever I can. Minimal visual cleanup, things like that. Old school controls, the works. So with Metal Slug 2, performance issues aside, I do enjoy the game. It's not a bad game. It's not my favorite Metal Slug, but it is not like the worst game that I've ever played. It's not like, games that I've played where I physically could not beat them because they were just that bad. So with Metal Slug 2, it does a couple of interesting things with it and stuff. It has new bosses and it has new locations and of course the frame rate issue, but the big thing is that I like the character selection. I like a lot, I think. Like, I go and, I like these older games, and I like the art style they had. SNK always has, like, that really kind of anime, hyper-caricature-ish sort of style to all of their games and stuff. I like how a lot of their stuff is hyper-stylized and blown out of proportion and stuff. I feel that as the years have gone by, a lot of SNK's games, used that as a form of their identity. Like, all of SNK's games are really cartoony. Like a lot of people are like, well, of course they're cartoony, they're old side-scrollers and stuff and yada yada yada, but, you can go and you can look at other games, from back then that were competing in the same class as, like, all of SNK's games, and they had a very different aesthetic. Like SNK made their games deliberately cartoony for the most part when it came to Metal Slug and a couple of the other titles that they made. And I've always really appreciated that, I think. Like, even being in the middle of my 30s, I still go and I enjoy the aesthetic of it. It just looks good. It aged well. The background effects, running at a blistering 5 frames a second, but, they still look good as well. The assets just aged like fine wine, I think. And there's a lot of, I think the biggest thing that Metal Slug, well, SNK kind of suffers from in general, is when you play a lot of their games, there's a lot of stereotypes weaseled in. Like, oh, we're in Egypt, naturally there's going to be mummies, and or, some of the levels that look like they take place in Arabia, it's like people with scimitars in their teeth coming after you and stuff, and I think it's kind of funny, because they never really took these games too seriously. Like, this is back when games were just meant to be fun. People didn't really worry about how offensive they were, or they didn't really worry about the stereotype that was attached to it. You know, they were just meant to be goofy, you were meant to have a good time, and that was pretty much it. So I think that I really kind of appreciated that a lot about these games and stuff, you know, because they weren't really meant to be taken seriously. They were borderline stupid with how they did things sometimes, and yet you still managed to have a good time with it. You know, it was that stylization, I think, that really paid off for a lot of these games. You know, and then you always kind of felt like, I feel in Metal Slug, you always kind of felt like you were whipping ass and stuff. Like, the weapons feel punchy, like the machine gun feels good. The missile launcher feels good. Like, pretty much almost every weapon that they have in these games, short of a couple, feels really good. The shotgun feels nice and punchy, it feels powerful, you know, it doesn't fire too fast, it doesn't fire too slow. It's just really, they kind of paid attention with a lot of these games, and I really like that. You know, it's one of the reasons why I would constantly come back to playing SNK games when I was a kid. Like, even if I went and beat them, I would still come back to them. I would be like, ah, okay, this is what we're doing, this is really nice. You know, I knew that I was going to have a good time, no matter what I did or how hard the game decided to rob me that day. You know, so I would go and I'd play these and I'd always have a really good time with it. You know, it's pretty much a guaranteed thing every single time I went to the movie theater. And, you know, it's kind of weird because I feel like there's a sort of addictive quality with arcade games. You know, like you're going and you're just like progressing through the game, and you know, you die and it's time to put the change in, and there's kind of this panic because, you know, you have to go and prevent the timer from getting to 0 because obviously at that point it's game over. So like there's this rush to go and shove a coin in the slot and then, you know, slam start and you're ready to go. And so I think that a lot of, when it comes to a lot of these SNK arcade games and stuff, I think that addiction kind of factored into it a little bit. So I would always go and have a good time with it, and then, you know, if the going was getting good and I died, I'd be like, shit, I gotta get another coin in there, you know, and it was part of how they were making money, essentially, but strangely enough, it's a core memory from my childhood, you know, like all arcade games are like this. They all have to be super fun to play and stuff, and so they have a tendency to poke out into my mind a little bit more than most console games that I play these days. You know, like most console games I play these days, they're not terribly memorable, I don't think. You know, like a lot of the console games that I play these days, I'll go and I'll play it, and there's not really a lot of super memorable stuff in it. Like, there's not a lot of wow moments or hey, that's really cool moments. And when I play a lot of these old arcade games, I can look back on them and say, damn, this game still looks good, or hey, this is really, really fun, or, you know, like I can go and I can make remarks about them, and I can sit there and say, you know, with confidence, hey, these are still fun, well over 25 years later. And so I kind of miss that a little bit. I think with a lot of these old arcade games, I know for a fact that nostalgia comes into play. I'm not even going to try to bullshit around and say that it doesn't, because I know that it does. You know, you're definitely looking at it through rose-tinted glasses and stuff. I mean, yes, these games have issues, but, you know, they're still very, very enjoyable. Like, I don't really feel that the controls aged very well, or neither did the frame rate issues, but the games are still fun. They're still very playable. But no, I was sitting down and my godson had never played an arcade game before. It was actually really endearing. I was like, alright, dude. You know, we're gonna rock it like it's 1995. You know, and I remember he was sitting there and he goes, well, what happens if we die? And I was like, we gotta get good. You know, which naturally I'm already dog shit at these games, but, you know, I like to smile and I like to share the moment with him, be like, you know, we gotta be good, we gotta be the best, you know, and I like introducing him to things like this, because the only thing that he's known, realistically, the only thing that he's known his entire life is gaming that holds your hand. You know what I mean? Like, you go and it's like, oh, just press start to continue, or load from previous save, or in many ways, you know, like when we were playing these games, he had infinite continues, but he wasn't used to the brutality of it. Like, he wasn't used to a game just flat out smacking him in his mouth and then him having to adapt, is what that boiled down to. you know. So he would go and we were sitting down and we were playing these games. And it's kind of funny because, like, he's young, right? You know, I'm coming up on my 40s pretty soon, you know. He's still very, very, very much so young. And so we would go and we would bang these games out, and my girlfriend would come in and she'd be like, okay, lovelies, what are you guys doing? And my godson he's so goddamn funny about it. He wouldn't even be like, we're playing the game. He would turn around and he'd be like, we're beating ass. And I loved that, you know, and I love sharing that time and that memory with him. So we're going and we're playing these games, and it's kind of funny because the way that it was working is it was on the handheld. If I died X amount of times, I would pass it over to him, you know, rocking that crap like it's the 90s and you only have a single controller, you know. So if I went and I died, I would pass it off to him, and he would die, and he'd pass it off to me, and we just shared it, and we had that experience. And then there was like a couple of other times where he would just die repeatedly, and I would just be like, you know what, dude, just have another continue. It's perfectly fine. You know, just go ahead and take another stab at it. So I find it incredibly humbling, right? Because my godson's never seen these games before. He's never experienced it. He's never been to an arcade. He's used to literally going, turning on his console, downloading, you know, what game he's allowed to buy, never leaving the house to go and get it, downloading it, seeing if it needs an update, you know, and then going and playing it and getting mugged with microtransactions and various other forms of DLC. So for him to sit down and play these games, he was kind of in culture shock for a little bit. He's like, oh, it's hard. And then the other thing that's kind of screwed with me a fair bit is when we started playing this game, he was like, where's the multiplayer? And I had to explain to him, hey man, multiplayer, we're not going to be able to do it on the Odin because it's just a little tiny handheld, but multiplayer wasn't so much a thing over the internet back then. We didn't have the net yet. Well, we had it, but it was in a very rudimentary form. We weren't using it for online gaming yet. So I had to explain to him, you know, I had to sit down with him and be like, honey, we don't have DLC. There's no microtransactions. There's no online presence. There's no achievements. There's literally nothing. There's no game chat. It's just you playing the game. You just going, pressing start, and playing the game. I thought that he was going to hate it. I was really waiting on it, I think. Like, I was going, and I was expecting to have, like, this huge amount of backlash and an insane amount of recoil from it, but I was actually wrong. He loves it. He now, as an end result of playing arcade games, cannot stand modern gaming because he does not like being force-fed adverts 24/7. Or dealing with people on the internet at all in multiplayer lobbies anymore. It's really funny. Like, I kind of create a monster, I think, with it. Because I showed him that gaming used to be just press start. And so, you know, now he sees a game with adverts. Oh, buy the season pass, or buy this microtransaction, or we have new DLC coming, or have you checked out this? Have you checked out that? And now he just kind of sits there, and he goes, and he looks at me, and he goes, I just want to play the game, essentially. And so I just kind of sat back, and I kind of smile, and I laugh a little bit, and I chuckle a little bit, and I'm like, you know what? I get that. I get that. So I would kind of laugh a little bit, and, you know, I laugh and I nod, essentially. I laugh and I nod, and I say, hey man, I get it, and you know, I give him a hug, and that's pretty much it. But the more he plays these older games, right, the less he wants to play modern games because he doesn't feel they're complete packages anymore. And I think that it kind of helps us bond a little bit because now he understands that games used to be released in a complete fashion. You know, you didn't have to go and wait for an update to fix an excessively buggy experience. And so it's really, really nice for him to just have that experience, and I'm glad that I could go and share that and give that to him, essentially. You know, I really like that. He has a good time with it. He likes the difficulty. He's like, oh man, I died. You know, and he's like, I gotta get better. And I was like, it's time to get better, you know, and we share that experience and we have that time together, and it's really nice because he's just had his hand held for so fucking long by newer games that he just kind of, he's been craving challenge, essentially. Most gamers are, you know, like they don't want a super duper easy experience. like super tough. In the quest for accessibility, challenge was sacrificed because there's this notion now that gaming has to be accessible for everybody, which I believe that most games are meant to be accessible for everybody, but not every single game has to be. Like, you know, Dark Souls, for example, it doesn't have to be accessible. I would appreciate larger text and stuff, and maybe a better, well, maybe in general a contrast mode, but you know, it's kind of reaching a fair bit. It's a little bit of a stretch. So, you know, he's going and he's playing these games, and he was blizzing through this area right here with the jet and stuff. Oh yeah, in a minute, hon. But he was blitzing through this area here with the jet, and it's kind of weird because he's never seen a game have excessive amounts of frame rate issues. And then, so this leads him to believe, he's like, I'm kicking so much ass that the game is slowing down, and I love that. I didn't even have the heart to tell him. It's like, man, it was just running on a limited hardware spec. That's fine. He's sitting there and he's like, I'm beating so much ass that, you know, I'm causing the game to slow down. It's awesome. And instead of just taking that from him, I was like, you know what, dude, you can have that. It's perfectly fine. I get it. And so he really enjoys these games. And, you know, for me, it's nostalgia, but for him, it's a whole new world. And I like that. I like that he's able to have that experience. I like that he's able to have his teeth kicked out. And instead of being like, it's too hard, I'm going home, he literally goes, fuck it, let's do it again. You know, well, he doesn't say that, but, you know, he's thinking it really loudly. He keeps coming back for more. He wants to get better at the game. And so there was a period when we were going and filming these that I was like, you know what, dude, just have fun with it. I was like, you know, I'll pick it up in the later rounds and stuff. You know, we're going to be filming this regardless. You know, just have fun with it. And as an older generation, being able to sit back and watch him play these old games and enjoy these old games, you know, even with things like free play and everything else turned on, it really warms my heart because it lets me know that gaming's not dead yet. You know, like I've been saying for years now that gaming is dead because of how greedy the industry's become. For me, indie gaming has more or less been my gateway drug to better gaming. But with him, you know, like, he's been raised on all this crap. So he goes and he plays these older games that are complete and stuff. It's a whole new world for him, and so now he just can't get enough of it. Granted, I've had to keep a lid on it, essentially, because I don't want him becoming addicted to it or anything like that. I mean, it's good to enjoy something, but it's not good to become a slave to it. So, he, the entire time we were going and filming these, he would be allowed to do, I think it was 3, sometimes 4 hours on the weekends, and then during the week it was like an hour, you know, depending on how much homework he had and stuff, but he just loves these games so much. And it's nice to see that the younger generations are capable of loving these old arcade games as much as I do. You know, like, I was really dreading it for like a while there. I was like, oh man, he's gonna hate it, you know, he's gonna be mad that he's dying 24/7. Oh man, fucking hell, this is gonna be an awful experience. You know, like, I was really sweating it for a while. I was sitting down going, man, I really hope he just doesn't have a bad experience, but he just kind of kept coming back. He didn't mind dying. He didn't mind the occasional lazy grenade being hawked at him. You know, got to get that extra quarter, man. You got to die to the nade, you know. And so he would just go and he would just have so much fun, and he loved the art style. He loved the color and everything else, you know. He loved how colorful a lot of these older games are. I think these Metal Slug titles have like a little bit of a brown tint to them. They kind of remind me of a 2D Unreal Engine where the color palette looks like it's washed over in brown a fair bit. You know, it's like super dark and stuff, and everything kind of blends together, but he didn't really care about it at all. He just wanted to go and play it and have a good time with it, and he just kind of laughs and stuff at all the silly, goofy stuff, and like, he's not really, like, even with all the stereotypes in these old games and shit that, you know, they're going and being enforced, he's not bothered by it. You know, to him it's just like a really silly game with really nice graphics, and it's super fun, and I really miss that. You know, I really miss that a lot about gaming, you know, and Nowadays, like I went and I played a newer game the other day. Nowadays, it's like it has to have an advanced plot, and it's got to be inclusive of everything, and it's got to represent everything. And it's like, listen, man, I'm a fucking soon-to-be in their 40s fucking trans woman. Okay, I love inclusion. I love representation and everything else. That's great. I don't mind stories in my games, you know, like I don't really mind a lot of the stuff that modern gaming is trying to push. But sometimes when you go and you play a game, you just want to have silly fun. You don't care if it has, like, a couple of stereotypes here and there. You don't care if it has, like, an advanced plot. You know, you just don't really give a shit. Like, you just don't care, you know, if it has, like, any of these things that everything is being pushed with these days. You know, sometimes you just want to go and play the game, and I think these older SNK games kind of embodies that, you know. Nowadays, for example, just picked up a watermelon a couple seconds back there. I'm pretty sure that somebody somewhere in the modern, modern demographic of gaming, if I was to go and pick up a watermelon, I'm pretty sure somebody would scream that it's racist. And they would try to make it racist, simply because it's just a watermelon in the game, you know, and I feel the gaming's kind of gotten blown out of proportion. Everything is so misconstrued these days, you know, a little bit and stuff, and people are always looking for something. Like, I'm all for equality and social justice and advancing everything, you know, I'm all about it, but I think with gaming and stuff, it's emphasized on so much that it kind of craps on the experience. Like, not every game has to have a gay character, not every game has to have certain political representation and things like that. Sometimes you just want to have fun. You know, like, you just don't really want an advanced reasoning behind it. You just want to have fun with it. Like, you know, these old Metal Slug games, the military's never really, like, the military presence is never really well explained or anything. You know, like, it's never really nodded to any specific military or anything like that. You know, you just know that you're fighting the bad guys. They don't even really have much of a name to them. You know, you're just going and you're fighting these soldiers and everything looks goofy. You know, we've got this land tank that goes and it looks like a ship and the cannon pops out on hydraulics and it's just so silly and so fucking strange that you just look at it and you're like, you know what? That's alright. You know, like, you go and you look at it a little bit and you're like, that's alright. But I think this is why I like older games so much, because yes, you know, we didn't really have a ton of representation, but when we did have representation, like when Tomb Raider and stuff came out, it felt more meaningful. You know what I mean? Like, it felt like it was actually relevant. It didn't really feel like it was this arbitrary, mandatory thing that's being shoved in to appease everybody. It felt like they were sticking their character, doing something in the game for the sake of it being meaningful. For the sake of advancing things, so to speak. And so there wasn't a lot of games, well, at least not a lot of arcade games back then, that had female characters. And I remember Metal Slug walking up and experiencing Metal Slug 2 and saying to myself, oh, hey, there's a girl in here now. And I really like that. You know, like, nobody tried to shove it down anybody's throats. They were like, we have a whole selection of characters for you to pick. We've got a couple of guys and we've got a couple of girls. You know, have fun with this. And so it was really nice with Metal Slug how subtle the representation is, because, like, even the female characters, they're not living a stereotype. Essentially, like, the female characters, like, listen, we have gun, we will shoot you. We will kill all of you. We will pull out the same knife that all the other characters have, and we will stab you. And I liked that, because a lot of the games back then that were doing female representation, it was like, oh look, there's a girl in our game. With Metal Slug, they didn't give a shit. They were just like, fuck it, stick it in there. We want that in there, just stick it in there. And so I always thought that that was really refreshing, because I feel like when you go and when you toss a specific character from a specific demographic in there, it almost feels like you're kind of clamoring for attention a little bit. Like, I see that a lot with modern games and stuff that, like, we have a trans character. And as a trans person, I do appreciate the representation. However, I don't feel like it's honest representation because it feels like you're trying harder to gain approval for the sake of sales than trying to go and stick a character in there because the character actually fits. I've seen quite a few games that do it well. I've also seen quite a few games that do it badly. And I think for me, growing up as a kid, Metal Slug was probably the first encounter that I ever had with proper representation. There was no pick-me stuff. It wasn't a play our game, there's females in it now. There was no, hey, you know, look guys, there's a female in here, we're so progressive. It was the advertisement for Metal Slug 2. I remember the poster sitting at the movie theater because the owner would stick posters up quite often of new games and stuff. I always thought that was really cool. And there was never a mention across any of that poster of there being a female character. And it was all about this machismo and this kicking of ass and this gun-ho stylized, you're gonna destroy anybody and everything kind of, you know, mentality with it. And yet you go, you play the game, and you realize there's female characters in there now. And it's really nice. So subtle, not clamoring for attention, just feels good, and I love it. So it's one of the reasons why Metal Slug stuck with me so much, because as a company, they didn't really, like I said, they didn't really clamor for it, they just said, hey, we're doing it. And I can respect that, I think. Like, I feel that's kind of how, like, representation should be. You know? Like, I feel like that you should do something simply because you want to do it and it fits properly. You know, like, I understand that we're trying to push for a better society and stuff, and a lot of the times that has a tendency to bleed into our entertainment, which is great. But at the same time, I'd rather have it done naturally than have it forced. You know, when it doesn't feel natural and stuff, you just kind of cringe a little bit, maybe turn your head to the side, and, you know, that's pretty much it. But when you have it done kind of like this, you know, it feels really good. And I just really appreciate the hell out of that. And, you know, like my godson, he had pointed that out too. When we were going and playing Metal Slug 2, he's like, oh, I can be a girl. And I was like, yes, you can. And I was like, do you want to? And he's like, yes. You know, like, he was just really excited for it and stuff. And, you know, I was just really happy because, like, he noticed it. He had picked it up and stuff. And we sat down and we talked about it, you know. Throughout our entire duration of playing Metal Slug 2, we talked about representation and stuff. To give you an idea, my godson is a person of color and stuff, you know, and he's also got a lot of Jewish heritage and ancestry on the other side, you know, so it's really nice for him to, like, go and recognize that, yes, you know, game developers do have inclusion very subtly a lot of the time. You know, and it wasn't just new games that were doing it, it was also old games. You know, we sat down and we talked about it, and, you know, he was like, I kind of like how they just added this new character to play as, and, you know, he's pretty bright for his age and stuff. He's doing everything so damn early, man. And we talked about, we continued talking about inclusion and stuff, and, you know, he's in the same basket as me, where he's like, I just don't kind of like how they shove it in my face. And, you know, we kind of went and we discussed it, and he's like, you know, I know that I'm brown, essentially, and he's like, I wouldn't mind seeing more brown characters like me. I just don't like them being forced. And I was like, you know, I get that. So he played through this entire game and stuff with me, and, you know, we had a good time with it. And this game was really cool because it had stemmed a conversation about inclusion, you know, like why it's important, how to properly do it and stuff. Like, it was a lot of critical thought playing a game that's dumber than a bag of hammers. You know, a game that is literally just going and moving from left to right, shooting shit and dodging shit. It actually gave us a lot of really good conversations, you know, like we would go take a break, and because we had to go and practice this game quite a bit. You know, he wanted to play it, I wanted to play it, and then I wanted to film it on the side, you know, so I could share it with people on YouTube. And, you know, the conversations were really good and really healthy to have, I think, you know. So, but it was just a complete and utter blast. We also had a couple tech talks about, you know, frame rate, things like that. Like, the frame rate talk did eventually hit, but I kind of kept with the theming of it. You know, like I told him, I was like, hun, when the game slows down, that's because it has a bad frame rate. And I kind of lied through my teeth a little bit because I don't want to take away from his moment, right? You know, so I was like, okay, you know, the frame rate completely and utterly shit the bed because you are kicking ass so hard that it can't handle it. And, you know, I laughed and, you know, he laughed as well, and we both smiled, and it was just really nice. But no, in a lot of these later sections and stuff, you can see like a lot of the slowdown, and I considered fixing the frame rate issues for a while because they become really pronounced later on. And I eventually ruled against it because I was like, ah, dude, I just want an authentic experience. I mean, I'm okay with playing it on an emulator because you cannot really, not realistically, I think, record footage and have it be decent from an arcade cabinet. And so I knew that I was going to be going and playing it on an emulator, and I was like, okay, you know, this game's frame rate's kind of going to hell. Do I want to try to fix that? And eventually I was just like, nah, man, let's just leave it as is. So I actually struggled with this particular portion here that I've been on for a hot minute now. I literally went and my thumbs were friggin' killing me. Like, so the AYN Odin, it comes with relatively flat buttons. Like, they greatly remind me of SNES gamepad buttons. And so they're flat. They're completely round and flat on the top. And when I was going and filming these, there was a lot of button mashing with, like, the trains and stuff. So when you have flat buttons, a lot of the time it hurts your thumb. Flat buttons I don't really recommend. Like, I like to have my buttons a little bit round. It's a little bit kinder on the thumbs. Like, I kind of like to have a little bit of that dome on the top. And so I went ahead and I was like, alright, you know, this is what we're doing, and yada yada. But I found that when we were going and shooting these games, oh man, my thumb was so damn raw. Especially at that train sequence. So the Odin actually wound up getting mods later. I'm not able to mod it as much as I want to, but I wound up going and ordering some buttons from Sakura Retro Mods. And they're basically the same damn thing except a slightly different color scheme, and then they're rounded and extremely polished on the top. And by the time this mod arrived all the way from France, I was already done filming these damn things. And I was like, you know, I really wish I would have had this mod some 2.5 months ago, essentially. You know, like, the buttons are extremely high quality, but there was a wait list for them because these buttons are made by hand. They're not mass-produced. So the owner is like, right, you're going to go ahead and place a pre-order for them right now, and they're going to be ready to go in a couple of months. And I thought that when the man had posted they'll be ready to go in a couple of months, I thought that he was bullshitting. No, it takes a couple of months, which is fine. You know, the quality is so damn high on these fucking things that it justified the wait. It was also worth the $25. So the entire time I was going through the sewers here, my thumbs are screaming because the frame rate's going to hell. I'm trying to button mash while I'm in this damn tank. And the only thing that I'm thinking in the back of my mind is, oh my god, I hate these buttons. And it's really weird because I'm so used to playing on modern controllers that, like, have just standard, slightly rounded buttons that when I get a button that's flat now, I freak out. Like, my Pro Controller for my Switch has slightly flat buttons, and I feel it. However, the buttons are big enough to where I don't really feel like they're rubbing my thumbs raw, you know, and then they also have, like, really good travel distance. So I was just so annoyed because right as I had wrapped up filming all of these, the buttons arrived. I remember going to the post office, picking them up, and I wasn't even expecting them. Like, I didn't even get a notification from Etsy that they had shipped. They had just shown up. And I was like, damn, that's nice. I went ahead and I opened up the package. I saw that it was the buttons. I realized I had finished filming the day before, and I was like, motherfucker, really? You know, like, I was just so annoyed by that. And, I mean, I'm glad I did the mod, but man, I wish that they had just come out a little bit sooner, just a little bit faster, you know, and it was a hell of a thing. It really was. So I've been fighting this boss for like a hot minute now, and I've always, out of all the SNK games, I've always hated it when they've done bosses like this. It doesn't really have, I don't know. It doesn't so much have anything to do with the game itself. I feel like it has everything to do with the controls. Because without this Metal Slug tank here, life would be miserable. Like, going and doing this boss fight in general would have been fucking awful. Because you jump and shoot, jump and point down and shoot, and I just really hated that. And, I mean, yeah, you could use the grenade method, but eventually you do run out of grenades and you'd have to jump and shoot and everything else, and it was just really kind of a tough thing, I think, you know, and I think a secondary thumbstick would have really just benefited greatly, but with these games coming out in the 90s and stuff, you know, there was no secondary thumbstick, and so it's just, I feel that a lot of the bosses like this that they have set up in this particular configuration, I feel like they kind of slip into tedium because it's not so much jumping and dodging and stuff, although I do a fair bit of that in this particular fight. It's jump, dodge, you know, aim down, shoot, jump, dodge, aim down and shoot. Like, it keeps your thumbs very busy. Very, very busy. You know, and I kind of struggle with it a little bit because when games are super tedious like that, when they're high pressure and you're just constantly putting in button commands, you know, without any sort of real break, your thumbs start to hurt after a while. You're just kind of sitting there and like you're crying and your thumbs are bent backwards and the tips are raw, and the only thing you're saying to your loved ones is, please think of my poor abused thumbs, and, you know, it's just a hell of a thing. Oh man, I forgot how bad the frame rate in this particular area was. Holy shit. But, yeah, it was just a hell of an experience and stuff, and there was a couple of other things I could have done. I know that somebody suggested turn on auto fire. You know, they were like, oh, just go ahead and turn on auto fire. It'll be fine, you know, and I just didn't really, I don't know, I didn't really want to do that. I can't even remember the reasoning why. Like, I think I was, like, worried about, the game slowing down a super huge amount because it already has problems with projectiles. Like, if there's literally too many projectiles on the screen, the game has a tendency to go and slow down, and, you know, it was just really weird. You know, it's kind of odd because I was like, on one end it's like, you know, it would be nice to have auto fire, but on the other end it's like, you know, I am trying to shoot for authenticity. I don't want the game to slow down too much. I don't really want to go and have the I don't really want to go and try to do any overclocking because then that kind of ruins the authenticity. Like, it was just like one thing after another. So eventually I was just like, you know, I'm just going to have raw thumbs. That is okay, you know, and it was really just kind of a hell of a thing, I think. And then, of course, you know, once that area is done with its animations, everything just kind of smoothens out a fair bit. And then I have to go and fight this Rambo knockoff with what appears to be an MG60 in his hands. And so it's just kind of a hell of a thing. I had eventually gotten frustrated with it, said fuck it, tossed a bunch of nades at his ass, and I was pretty much done with it. You know, and then you got the absurdity of what appears to be a whale coming out of, you know, the water and just going and eating his corpse. And that's one thing I can openly admit about SNK games is they're always really bizarre. Like, I find that a lot of Japanese games from the 90s and early 2000s are very bizarre. Like, they didn't really have any fucks to give. And so, like, you go and you see stuff like this, and you kind of laugh a little bit because it's just so goofy, you know, and oh man. But yeah, it's just a hell of a thing, I think. I laugh a little bit when I go and I look at this, because in the back of my mind I'm like, oh man, I'm getting it done, and there's another portion of me that's like, oh man, what the hell was I thinking? You know, like, I'm playing this incredibly strange game, what the fuck, dude? And It's just a hell of a thing. But yeah, out of all the videos that I did, I think Metal Slug 2 performed the worst in terms of frame rate and stuff. And I mean, it's really interesting because a lot of the animations are done really, really well. You know, the effects are really, really nice, but at the end of the day, it's quite literally running on a souped-up Genesis. You know, and the Genesis was good for the time, but even the Genesis had pretty outdated hardware for the time period that it was trying to go and compete with the SNES. In many ways, it was kind of like watching a Xbox Series, or what is it? Not even so much an Xbox Series S. I'd have to say probably like an Xbox One X trying to slug it out with a PS5. It was just kind of strange in that regard. So it's like, you know, you can tell that it's trying to run advanced games, but given the fact that it was just a chipset that was overclocked, essentially, you know, it really just, I don't know, like a lot of the games are really nice, right? They look good, they sound good, but man, some of these games just function like dog shit, and I think Metal Slug 2 kind of embodies that the best. I mean, out of all the videos I did as part of the SNK Arcade collection that I decided to do, I think Metal Slug 2 probably performed the worst. All the other ones, they do have the slowdown, but it's not like this. You know, and then I had to do, some research on it just to find out that, yes, this shit is the norm, because the last time I had played it, it was so long ago that I do not remember any of it. It's literally been so long that everything that is old is new again, and it's just kind of a hell of a thing. But I thought it was kind of weird how, like, so we're coming up on the end of the game a fair bit. I want to say we're about 3/4 the way through it. And I liked the animation for the little aliens and stuff. The only thing I didn't like about this section, I think this is more or less just me being a nitpicky cunt about it, is they just dump tons of them on you. And, you know, like, I understand a lot of these games are meant to be played with 2 players and stuff, but I think that a lot of it was like a foresight. Well, not so much a foresight, but a lack of foresight. You know, so it's like you have all these aliens, they have tons of health, and yeah, it's like you have the machine gun and stuff, and you're just kind of going through it, but it's just really, really tough, and as the entire later half of the game kind of goes and continues and carries on and stuff, it only has a tendency to get worse. So I think with SNK games, you know, it's like the aesthetic is there, but I wish that technically they were just a little bit better. You know, had a little bit more thought poured into them and stuff, and it's amazing when these games came out, they looked quite beautiful. They still do all these years later. I just wish that they were done a little bit better. You know, and I just kind of struggle with it sometimes, you know, because on one end, going in and playing these games, I have a lot of nostalgia. You know, like I have a hell of a lot of nostalgia, but on the other end, I think I'm kind of at that age where it's like I'm looking at things a little bit more objectively, and it's like, yes, this game has a lot of nostalgia, and it is super fun, but damn, it had some fucking issues. And so I think Metal Slug 2 kind of embodies that the best, because I do enjoy the game, I do have fun with the game, but the slowdown is so bad sometimes that it's really unreal. I legit thought it was my setup for a while. I was looking at the hardware configuration. You know, the hardware is more than capable of running this emulation. It's more than capable of running it and filming it at the same time. You know, for the handheld that I was using, the Odin, running pretty much all of it at the same time was only, I think, doing 15% load on everything. So I went ahead, and that's when I started doing research into it, and everybody's like, hey, yeah, no, it's not the emulation, you're running at full speed. That's literally the game. And so you kind of, I think when you go and you come back to these older games, you kind of say to yourself, oh, hey, you know, maybe I was just looking at all of it through, you know, rose-tinted glasses, essentially. And so I was going, and as I was doing research, you know, I kind of realized that nostalgia is a hell of a drug, and that some memories are so powerful that you don't really pay attention to the imperfections in them, right? You know, you're just like, oh my god, this is good, and then you go back and you revisit it, and it's like, okay, it is good, but it does have these issues, and It's kind of, in many ways, when you go and you play something and then you don't touch it for like 20 years, I think you're a little bit more capable of staring at it a little bit more objectively. You know, you're more capable of recognizing its flaws and stuff, because when you go and you kind of forget the game a little bit, you start playing it again, right? And you're going and you're like, okay, well, I haven't played this in forever. What is old is literally new again, and so you're more likely to pay attention to its flaws. So, but, yeah, it's just been a really fun experience, but I find that its technical difficulties are aggravating at times. You know, and I understand there was like a hardware limitation and everything else, but oh, it was so aggravating. I found out later, because I was like knee-deep in research trying to figure out how broken everything is. I found out later that this is not just exclusive to emulation, it was also doing it on other ports of the game. And I was like, really? You know, like I'm reading this and I'm just saying to myself, really? Yes, really. All the other times they've ported it across the DS, the PlayStation 2, OG Xbox, 360, all that shit, it has this frame rate issue. Instead of going through and saying, okay, can we smoothen this out, it suffers with it, it struggles with it. And so I kind of go and I look at it, and it's very refreshing, because I can sit there and be like, okay, you know, the game is good, but, you know, I can at least recognize that it has issues now. So, Metal Slug 2 got a re-release. It got a re-release in the form of Metal Slug X. And so the differences between, we are going to be doing Metal Slug X later on in the Summer of Arcade. You know, I understand that it's essentially the same game with a swapped color palette and a slightly better frame rate, and tweaks to various weapons and enemies and everything else, but I still wanted to do it because it was like different enough to be its own thing, essentially. So, funny story about this scene here. I was going and doing my thing, and I was using another video recording app at the time. So the interesting thing about Android 10, and every Android that came before it, is you can only record for so long on it before you have to manually stop the recording and make another one. The max file size is 4 gigs. So I was using another recorder at the time, and the recorder was like, yes, you can just keep recording, and I was like, okay. So I literally set it up for continuous recording, and I didn't know at the time that it was just going to go and make a whole nother recording. I thought it was going to be one continuous piece of footage. And so I was really kind of annoyed, and I was like, okay, well, you know, this game is stuttering, why is it doing it? So I found out that mid-fight, well, mid-final boss fight here, I had reached the 4 gig cap, and then as a consequence of this, it had decided to stop the other recording, process the other recording, then start up a fresh recording, all over the span of about 3 seconds. I had no idea that it was doing this. I thought it was going to be a continuous recording. So my first cut of this, the game had completely shit out, because RetroArch was just seizuring so hard in the background from the recorder trying to do this shit. So I wound up going and I said, what the hell? And I went and I talked to support about it, and I said, this is supposed to be a continuous recording. And they're like, it is a continuous recording. We go and we stop the old one, we automatically start a new one. And I was like, oh, fuck. So I went ahead and I found with some of these games, the settings that I had at the time for this one was, I was doing it in 1080p at like a specific bit rate with a specific frame rate, and as an end result, it was making the file a lot bigger than what it needed to be. So I didn't know that you don't need, depending on what resolution that you're going and recording games in, you don't need specific bit rates. So for 720p footage, I did not need a 12 megabit bit rate for that. And I had no idea. I'm still relatively new to it. When I go and I do recording on the Mac, it just records everything at 60 frames at the resolution that the screen is set to, so it literally does all the heavy lifting. with this app, well, with these Android apps, I literally had to go and learn about this shit, because if I didn't, nothing would function right. So I wound up giving up on the app in general because it didn't really terribly function too well. And it also would be prone to crashing, so I had gone and picked up another app called AZ Recorder. And it has limitations, since it's Android 10. Again, 4 gig file size, but with this one, it has an auto mode, which is nice as well. It doesn't always work, but basically what it'll do is it'll record the frame rate, as well as bit rate and resolution based off of what you're doing. So, and you can also manually set it. So what I did is, to save space, I manually set the resolution to 720p, and then I set the frame rate to 60 because I like to do my content in 60 for the sake of keeping the footage smooth when I can. And then from there, I just literally let it figure out the bitrate on its own instead of trying to do the math for it. And so when I went ahead and I streamlined it like that, it was really, really nice because the file size went down drastically. Like when I did the complete recording the first time, the file size wound up being 7 gigs. And then when I went and did the file size for this, like when I finished recording and watched the file size enumerate, it was only, I think, like 3.1. So, and it still looks good, you know, like even on a big screen, still looks good, really happy with it. And so it's literally been this learning experience and stuff, and I've had to get good, essentially, and I'm just kind of sitting here going, Jesus Christ, alright, here we go. You struggle with it a fair bit, you know, but it's nice because that's how learning is done, you know, like you go and learn how to do something. You're not always going to be comfortable with it, but once you're there, you're there. So it's just a hell of a thing. Alright. Yeah, this, I didn't really like this ending boss too much. Like, I think the ending boss is epic. I really do. Like, I think that it's like a really epic thing. But, the problem that I had with it is it feels kind of tedious. Like, it's cool to see all the tanks and the soldiers roll up to go and fight the alien menace, and it feels very 1950s, I think. Like a lot of those old 1950s films where aliens invade and the military rolls out in these classic tanks and stuff. But at the same time, it feels like the boss has a little bit too much health. Which, you know, everybody would kind of sit there and be like, but, you know, that's just how that is. And it's like, I get it, but I just don't like it. I don't give a shit, you know, and it's, it was a hell of a thing. Like, I think when I was shooting this, I was really exhausted at the time, you know, and I had, my godson had walked off and stuff. He was tired. He went to bed. And I was exhausted with, like, a really badass migraine at the time. I was, like, pushing to beat it. And so, dealing with that and the frame rate issues and stuff, it kind of, like, added up to a little bit of a miserable experience. But, you know, it eventually got done, and, you know, it just kind of had the Independence Day vibes at the end there. You know, let's go ahead and fly this aircraft into this other aircraft to shut it down, and, you know, it was just a hell of a... It was a hell of a thing to do, I think. Alright. And of course that dude's just like on that slab, you know, fucking almost completely naked and just tilts over on him. I remember just kind of sitting on the screen for a minute. Just being like, oh my god, I gotta put my name in. And then I was like, nah, it's just too far down the pike, to hell with it. But yeah, that pretty much covers all of Metal Slug 2. My various musings and rants and ramblings and everything else of the sort. To everybody that came out, I want to say thank you. You know, thank you for your time and your effort. You know, you guys make it great and stuff. I appreciate all that you guys do for me. We are going to be back with another video for the commentary series, and it's going to be, the commentary is literally going to be discussing commentary, I think, you know. So with that thought in mind, thank you guys for coming out. I appreciate it. I hope you had a good time. I had a good time making it. And until next time.